Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Bernadette Barton, and I am a sociologist and a gender studies professor at Morehead State University. And today I'm very excited to talk about my book that came out in 2021 called The Pornification of America: How Raunch Culture is Ruining Our Society. Um, so this book has been quite some time in the making. And what inspired it? It's basically an analysis of our hypersexualized society. So it explores all the ways that our culture has become pornified over the past 25, 30 years. I date raunch culture to the mid 90s with the ascendance of the internet um, coming into our daily life and people's use of the internet, and then the accelerating experience of internet pornography, and then how internet pornography transformed the culture. So it's complicated to talk about raunch culture in our society because there's a framework going on that it's empowering. So the culture tells girls and women that it is empowering to be like a porn star or a stripper, which I call out as bullshit in my book, not in those exact words. So basically, I argue that raunch culture is a problem not because it's sexy, but because it is sexist. So I draw on a lot of methods in the book. I'm a sociologist. I have been a gender and women's studies professor now for 25 years. So I have 25 years of experience talking about gender and exploring these issues with students in the classroom, having them bring in culture projects and talk to me about their lives. So that's one dimension of what I bring to the book. Another is that I am an expert on the sex industry, especially stripping. So I've written two books on the lives of exotic dancers. And raunch culture is the offspring of the sex industry. It draws on tropes from the sex industry. Things like wearing thongs and getting Brazilian waxes and twerking and breast augmentation and full pouty lips. Okay, so these things that the culture are telling women are important to make you hot are coming from the sex industry, which is something I know quite a bit about. I also conducted 67 qualitative interviews with folks about their ideas on raunch culture. And these are individuals who ranged in age from 18 to a woman in her late 70s. So I tried to get a snapshot of what people think about raunch culture and how it differs by generation as well as by sex, sexual orientation, and race. So, the book covers a whole lot of material, stuff that is just incredibly timely and interesting. I hope it's a book you consider reading. I hope you give it to the teenagers in your life who are trying to figure out what's going on. I hope you consider assigning it in your classroom. I talk about things like the male gaze. I talk about dick pics. I talk about social media. I talk about internet pornography. Um, I even talk about, the ascendance of Donald Trump and what that means and the pornification of politics. So I cover a lot of very timely topics in the book, drawing on a lot of feminist concepts that are very valuable for folks to know. And I talk about them in language that people, I hope, well understand. I also put in a ton of photos in this book, which I was just really grateful to my press, NYU Press, for, working with me to create an incredible photo spread illustrating the Tarantula culture and the male gaze. So it is, again, the hypersexualization of society that we see everywhere. We see it on our phones, we see it in social media, we see it in the mall, in magazines, in movies, and television. You can find it in music lyrics, and videos, in comedy material, billboards, bus advertisements, t-shirts, video games, hookup cultures, conversations at parties. It just goes on and on. Now, what happened with raunch culture, this like hypersexualized representation of women in society, is that it sort of gradually crept up on us. So in the mid 90s, when I first started noticing this phenomenon, and I can actually kind of remember some of the moments when I first noticed it. So I'm 54, and so I guess I was in my, I don't know, mid to late 20s, getting into my 30s around that time. So I had already had a couple of decades of observing the culture before raunch culture appeared. So what I saw going on in the 90s, well, first, okay, so we had the sexual revolution, which was about sexual and gender freedom, obviously more complicated than that. But then there was this devolution into raunch. Now, at first, though, like the first glimpses that I saw of raunch weren't necessarily something that were so distressing, they were just noticeable. So, for example, I remember watching the comedy show Roseanne, and one of the characters in it was someone who was in pornography that's showing up in one of the last seasons. And then there was the movie Barbed Wire, starring Pamela Anderson. That was an incredibly pornified representation of a female action hero, which at the time didn't really bother me because there was not very much of that going around. So it was sort of novel and interesting and different. Um, but what happened is there just got to be more and more and more of it in just a really compulsory way. So meanwhile, the internet porn, more and more sexualization. And then around the early aughts, Ariel Levy wrote a book called Female Chauvinist Pigs, where she analyzes this phenomenon. And I was like, absolutely, yes, I see this everywhere. I had just published a book on exotic dancing. And so I was really attuned to the experiences of strippers. And so I just remember walking by a Payless shoe store and seeing row after row of stripper heels being sold in mainstream society. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Not everybody needs to wear stripper heels all the time when they're going out. So, like, what is this about? Meanwhile, my students in my classrooms were just not really showing any more feminist awareness as the decades went by. I'm still teaching the same things over and over again. I remember a very poignant day in class where we were talking about sexual assault, and this was in my course on the sex industry. And a young woman just shared out loud in the class that she was just recalling a hookup and the boy who'd been with her, who penetrated her without her consent the next morning, and just how that was a rape, and she hadn't even realized it till now. So it's like I just felt a responsibility to do more for my students to help them see this phenomenon that enables rape culture, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. So brunch culture is really confusing to talk about because it suffers from what I call in the book a condition of inarticulation. So that means we don't have really good words to talk about it. We don't have a language to describe it. We barely have a language to perceive it. You ask someone what raunch culture is, and they're probably going to be confused and blink their eyes and be like, not sure, until you show a few Hardee's commercials, images from Hardee's commercials or some other, social media, sexy selfies, just all that wealth of stuff. Then they're like, oh yeah, now I see it. I know what that is. But we don't really, one, have words to see it and then have words to critique it because most of the words that belong to it came from patriarchy. And what the narrative that patriarchy gives people is that it's empowering for girls and women to dress like strippers and porn stars. And, if you're critical of it, it means you're slut shaming them. So that really just silences people from saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I don't want to dress like a stripper. And hey, maybe there's other things that are valuable. And why is it that girls and women are being socialized into giving boys and men free sex work? Like, who came up with that? And why is that a good deal? Why is that empowering? To me, that's like a very pure illustration of Orwellian doublespeak. So I cover all these kinds of things in the book. And it's complicated to talk about it because people get defensive. So one way to deal with that is to keep your focus on the culture and not on individuals. In individual lives, it's messy. We make decisions and choices all the time. Blaming individuals for any of their behaviors is not going to get you anywhere. The point is to focus on the forest, not the trees. And that's what I try to do in my book, The Pornification of America. So thanks so much for listening to this really short discussion of it, this informal discussion of it. I hope you give it a chance. It's available everywhere. Amazon, all the different online outlets, through the press. I'm going to include a coupon code. I'm happy to speak to your classes about it. It's a topic that people have a lot to say about it. So it's really fun to talk about in the classroom. And it's really fun to just read and think about. So I hope you all have a fabulous day.